I have been using Linux, specifically Ubuntu, on my desktop PC for years now. It's been extremely reliable and efficient. My desktop PC is mainly a gaming device, and I occasionally edit videos on it as well. With an NVIDIA GPU, the gaming performance is not as good as in Windows, but close enough, and Davinci Resolve can utilize all its graphics power without any issue. So for a very long time I have nothing negative to say about Linux on desktop computers. But for laptops it's a different story. Many years ago, almost a decade ago, I was a ThinkPad fan, and ThinkPad laptops have always been great with Linux. I installed Ubuntu on my then ThinkPad X220. The overall experience was amazing. With some tweaking and optimization, I got better performance and battery life with Ubuntu than Windows 7. At the period of time, my main laptop usage was web browsing and some document writing, very light photo editing, so I had no problem using a ThinkPad for all my usage. Then in 2017 I purchased my first MacBook Pro, and a few years later I switched to an M1 MacBook Air. For the past 4 years it's been my perfect mobile computer. It's got great performance for photo and some video editing, shockingly good battery life, and the build quality is also exceptional, better than any competitors in my opinion. But using the same laptop for 4 years makes me curious about what it's like living on the other side of the world. I don't really have any major complaints on my M1 MacBook Air, other than the SSD being too small, but I can work around it with an external storage. Inconvenient of course, but not enough a reason for me to switch computers. So the real reason why I wanted to switch is I simply got bored. It's like using iPhones. If you upgrade from a 3 or 4-year-old iPhone to the latest one, sure you have much better performance, but deep inside it's still basically the same phone, same interface, same apps. I tried out the latest MacBooks in Apple Store and found that I am really not impressed at all. Besides, the price for a real upgrade is just disgustingly high. But that is not the problem of Apple, it is just me being poor. As a result, my interest of buying a Windows laptop has been growing in the past month, and finally I decided to make the purchase of an AMD laptop because I want a better integrated GPU and better Linux compatibility. Because of the recent development of gaming handhelds like Steam Deck or ROG Ally, which are all equipped with an AMD APU, AMD becomes my ideal choice for a portable Linux device for gaming as well as some graphics work like photo and video editing. And based on my previous experience with ThinkPads and Linux, I opted for a Lenovo ThinkBook with a Ryzen 7 CPU. It has a beautiful 14-inch high refresh rate display, 24 GB of RAM, 512 GB of SSD, and it is interchangeable, and there is another slot for an extra SSD as well. So without needing to completely get rid of Windows 11 that was pre-installed, I just bought another SSD and installed Linux on it. I had been trying to use Windows on this laptop for a whole month, and maybe I will make another video talking about the Windows experience after my 7 years of macOS usage. But in the end I wanted to really give Linux a chance to be my main operating system on my daily driver. I spend far more time on my laptop than my desktop, because I am not always at home working, so I really want to make sure it is possible to switch to Linux entirely. And in fact I have only one real concern actually, and it is Davinci Resolve. I know for sure Firefox works perfectly on Linux, and Davinci Resolve has been the only other piece of software that I cannot live without. I did some research beforehand and saw many successful stories of people happily using Davinci Resolve with their AMD hardware. It really helped me make my decision on the AMD laptop. Little did I know I would encounter so many difficulties. Since this is a major part of my Linux experience, I would like to discuss the Davinci Resolve problems first. If you are not interested in editing videos in Linux, you can skip this part. The first thing I needed to decide was the distro of choice. My desktop PC is still using Ubuntu 22.04 LTS version, and I have no desire to upgrade anytime soon. But the desktop is using an NVIDIA GPU, so it's a different story here, since AMD relies on the latest kernel for better driver support. So I wanted to try a distro with newer kernels. The first thing that comes to my mind is, as you may have expected, the Ubuntu 24.04 LTS version. Ubuntu, despite all these controversies over the past years, is still my favorite distro. Maybe because it was my first encounter of the Linux world. I still remember the excitement I got when I received the live CD shipped to my home when I was a kid. And all these years gone by, Ubuntu still has the best community support when it comes to installing third-party software and driver stuff. But Davinci Resolve was not happy with Ubuntu 24.04 at all. First, the installation was a mess. Because Davinci Resolve relies on many older libraries, I need to tell the installer to skip checking them and just use the later ones in the operating system. Also, after the installation for it to launch, we need to disable or remove some files first. The installation of Davinci Resolve is not the difficult part. However, to get it to perform normally is far more difficult than I expected. For the AMD graphics, I know I need to get ROCm for Davinci Resolve to run at all. Luckily, the installation of ROCm is relatively easy as well. There are many tutorials online and a simple search would find them in a second. The sad part is, no matter which tutorial I followed, I just couldn't get Resolve to function properly. Yes, after the installation, Resolve recognizes the GPU and there is no more pop-up error that says unsupported GPU or something else. In the preference window, I can also see my integrated GPU listed there, but there is just no preview output no matter what kinds of media I put onto the timeline. Nothing will show in the playback tab. It is always a blank black screen. Even a simple text title won't be displayed. I spent some hours trying to solve this problem but failed. In the end, I had to try another installation method that is recommended by many. It is called Davinci Box, which is using Distro Box, some kind of a container to solve all the dependency issues. I am not going to pretend that I know anything about this method, so I will not explain in detail about it. I just followed the documentation on its GitHub page, and without any issues I got a fully functioning Davinci Resolve. Amazing. But then I started a real project, and then I found out the performance was extremely poor. I mean, the integrated GPU is of course not a powerhouse for video editing, but in Windows I can put multiple full HD footage into a timeline and even some text effects, and the timeline playback is still smooth. So when I saw that Davinci Resolve in DistroBox can't even play back a single full HD video track in real time, it really surprised me in a bad way. After some more research, I learned that with Davinci Box, Resolve is not using ROCm by default. Makes sense because of the problem I encountered previously. It is utilizing something called RustyCL. Again, I am not going to pretend that I know anything about it, but all I can tell you is that there is a huge difference in performance with RustyCL, at least in my case. Maybe it is not an ideal solution for my weak integrated GPU, but this seemed to be my only option if I ever want Resolve to work. At this stage I got really upset because I had spent so many hours just to get this one program to run. So I switched back to Windows 11 for quite some time to get my work done. A couple of weeks later I decided to give Linux another try. This time I chose Nobara Linux because I once tried it on a mini PC and I remember it stated that it has some optimization specifically for Davinci Resolve to run in Linux. So I picked up my USB disk and installed Nobara on my laptop. Sadly, I was getting the exact same issues. ROCm didn't work at all. RustyCL ran like garbage. I was desperate, so I tried another distro, Manjaro, which is basically Arch Linux. Many years ago when I was a distro hopper, I had some experience with it. The beauty of Arch Linux is that there is something called Arch User Repository, and basically I can find anything there. So I found the Davinci Resolve package and installed it with just one line of command. Same issues again. So it seems I have no choice other than sticking with Windows if I ever want to use Davinci Resolve on my AMD laptop, which is not the end of the world, but I just want a Linux laptop really bad, for no particular reason now that I think of it. Maybe I am just stubborn. And then one day when I was editing another video for my client on my desktop PC, I suddenly realized that I had not given Ubuntu 22.04 a try. It's near the end of 2024 now, and Ubuntu 24.04 has been out for many months already, so it just never hits me to install an older version of Ubuntu. It's definitely not what I wanted to do, but I figured what's the harm to spend another hour to try it out. To my biggest surprise, Davinci Resolve just works in Ubuntu 22.04. I can run the official installer without any errors once I installed the dependencies as suggested, and then I installed ROCm the exact same way I did on Ubuntu 24.04 previously. After a reboot, Resolve functions really well. Performance seems to be on par with it on Windows. I imported a project and it handles multiple tracks of full HD footage without any hiccup. Fusion effects also work. Sure, Davinci Resolve in Linux, as you may know, lacks a lot of things, such as the support for AAC audio and H.264 or H.265 export options, but there are easy workarounds for these minor issues. I am super happy to see Resolve running on my Linux install. I spent the next couple days using it to edit a couple of videos, and as expected, I have to solve a few things to make Resolve work smoothly. Some of them aren't even solvable, but that may be too much to put in here. and this puts a stop to my long struggle to get Davinci Resolve working on Linux. It's generally a happy ending, despite all the hours I had wasted. Now let's talk about the other parts of me using Linux on a laptop. When it comes to running Linux on a laptop, power consumption has always been my biggest concern, especially after spending years with MacBooks, which have insane optimization in this area. Since I have to stick with Ubuntu 22.04 LTS, the latest kernel I can install is 6.8. This seems to be causing a big problem, which is that I can't get suspend to function as expected. If I close the lid of the laptop, it always powers itself off instead of going to sleep mode, even after I made sure the system settings and this config file are configured correctly. In my brief time of using Ubuntu 24.04 as well as Nobara Linux, both of them are using the later 6.11 kernel, and I could get the laptop to suspend without any issue. So I need to figure out a way to install the latest mainline kernel provided by Canonical on my older Ubuntu system, but it seems to be impossible due to some dependency issues. This also drives me crazy, because after years of using the M1 MacBook, I just treat my laptop as my smartphone. I never turn it off, and it always works instantly once I open the lid. Now every time I want to use the laptop, I have to wait for it to boot and open all the apps I need to use. It completely changes my way of using a mobile computer. I hope sometime forward I can figure out a way to solve this problem. Regarding battery life, it is not bad. Right out of the box, it would consume a lot of power, even when there is only a YouTube video playing. As PowerTop shows here, it consumes over 20 watts when playing a YouTube video in Firefox. After some optimization like install TLP and using a script called AutoEp, I can get the number to as low as 10 to 12 watts, which means with the 84 watts battery on this laptop, I can get over 7 hours of continuous YouTube playback. This is with the display set to 120 Hz and brightness set to 50%, so if I can lower the brightness in indoor environment and set the refresh rate to 60, I can get even more battery life. If I am only browsing the web and writing a script like I'm doing right now, I can easily get around 10 hours battery life. This is amazing result, exceeds my expectation actually. And the best part is, unless I am doing some heavy work such as video editing, I never notice the fan noise. It has been running completely silently like 90% of the time. When editing videos, I can only get 3 to 4 hours of continuous usage. It is not bad though. With my M1 MacBook Air, I can get maybe 4 to 5 hours of video editing, but I'm not entirely sure about the numbers because I never had to work for such a long time without a power supply nearby. But in general, the Linux power management on my laptop is a big step down from Windows 11, mainly because of the suspend issue. Battery life-wise, they are very close. I don't do benchmarks, so I can only share my experience here. In general, I find that Linux performs quite a bit better than Windows 11, maybe because there are much less background services consuming the limited resources. I don't know why, but Windows 11 always feel very sluggish on my laptop. For example, the File Explorer sometimes gets extremely slow. Even all I do is just tell it to resort all the files in one folder. Also, the system animation can be very unresponsive. Coming from macOS, I get used to the touchpad gesture to switch between apps, but this animation for the overview of all the opened apps to show up is like 1 whole second delayed in Windows 11. In Linux, KDE in my exact case, everything just flies. Animations are instant. The Dolphin File Manager is 10 times more responsive than the File Explorer in Windows or Finder in macOS. Apps are opened in no time. It also consumes much less system memory, doing basically the same work. Like right now, I have Firefox with 17 tabs opened and many extensions installed. The total RAM usage is still less than 5 GB. In Windows or macOS, at least 4 GB of RAM would be already in use after a clean boot up, with nothing opened. In Davinci Resolve, exporting the same video project results in a slightly better time. I noticed 10% more FPS when rendering a long video. This is negligible to me though, since I never care much about exporting time. During the actual editing, there is no much difference. The Ryzen chip gives me comparable performance as my M1 MacBook Air in Davinci Resolve, which is good enough to me. Now that I'm getting used to the responsiveness of Linux, it becomes a painful experience to go back to the sluggishness of Windows 11, or the smooth but slow Mac OS. Overall, this is my favorite part of using Linux on my laptop. Regarding hardware compatibilities, I really don't have much to say. Other than the suspend issue mentioned before, everything just works. I don't have to install any extra driver, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, speakers, camera, even all the function keys on the keyboard work out of the box. I also need to mention that my Logitech mouse with some extra buttons is also completely compatible with Linux. I can remap the buttons with the help of a GitHub project called Solar, and the mouse would work just like in Windows. For example, I remap the forward key to a combination of Shift and Backspace, which is frequently used in Davinci Resolve. Software compatibility should be everyone's main concern when considering switching from Windows or Mac OS to Linux. Make sure the software you need to run are also working in Linux, or there are competent alternatives. To me, the most important piece of software is Davinci Resolve, and I spent so much time getting it to run. It is still not perfect though. There are still some issues that can't be fixed, and stability also takes a hit in Linux in my experience. But right now I consider Davinci Resolve Linux already adequate for my work, as I have already finished several projects with it. I am lucky though, because I don't need to use some of the software that doesn't work at all in Linux, like the Adobe stuff. I do need to edit raw photos, and sometimes I do miss Lightroom or Capture One, but I have learned to edit still photos in Davinci Resolve as well. Alternatively, Darktable is already overly powerful for my casual usage. With all the other things I do on a computer, I can just use a browser. Firefox has been running flawlessly on Ubuntu. I know many people dislike the fact that Canonical is using Snap for Firefox, but honestly I really don't feel the difference. There are benchmarks done by a Redditor, and it shows that there is very little performance difference between Snap version and the DEB version. An extra second of cold startup time is nothing I would think of, and it seems to be the only downside of using the Snap version of Firefox. I am using the KDE desktop on this Ubuntu installation, and I cannot stress enough how much I love KDE. About a year ago, I switched from KDE to GNOME on my desktop PC, and I deeply regret it, especially after a few weeks using KDE on the laptop. It has so much useful functionalities, while still runs blazing fast. With the help of the 120Hz display, everything looks extremely smooth. Switching between apps or desktops feels instant. Dolphin is the best file manager on any operating system. There is so much I can customize everywhere. Other than the desktop environment, Linux also feels great in my everyday usage of a computer. It handles system update much better than Windows 11, although I have seen less and less system restart requirements in Windows 11 lately. Installing and removing apps are extremely quick and easy compared to Windows. I don't have to worry about virus or malware anymore. Not that they don't exist in Linux world, but it's just much less likely I will be affected. I am having a hard time explaining this, but it just feels great using such a clean, snappy system. It is a feeling that I never have when using Windows or Mac OS. There is no cloud service that requires a login, no ads, no pop-ups that tell you to subscribe and pay for a certain feature. With Microsoft and Apple both trying to integrate more AI stuff into their operating systems, it just feels good to have a functional environment that allows me to run the necessary apps I need to use, and nothing more. When I look at the list of background running services, I know that there are no unnecessary crap-consuming resources. I know some of the people despise Ubuntu for some of its decisions in the past years, like the Snap situation I mentioned before. But to me, I really don't see any major differences switching between distros. Once I get my apps configured and running, I can't even tell which distro I am using. Of course, compared with Windows or Mac OS, there are definitely missing features in Linux. For example, using an external monitor with a different refresh rate and scaling factors is not possible under X11, and I can't switch to Wayland because of Davinci Resolve. My laptop's display comes with a built-in calibrated color profile, and it is in used by Windows 11, but there is no color management solutions alike in Ubuntu. There are a lot of things that are not deal breakers, but they are nice to have though. Gaming is one of the reasons that I convinced myself to leave macOS, and it works really well on Linux as I expected. Thanks to the development of Proton and Linux in general, every game that I own in Steam runs without compatibility issues in Linux. I can even play the most graphically heavy games such as Black Myth Wukong on this laptop at 1080p low settings. As a casual gamer who don't play intensive multiplayer games, this is perfect for me. Compared to Windows, I lost the access to Game Pass, but performance-wise they are extremely close. I don't notice any performance difference actually. This to me is a huge upgrade from the M1 MacBook, which theoretically can run many games, but in reality it's just an unpleasant experience due to the limited RAM and storage as well as software issues. Finally, I want to briefly talk about this particular Lenovo laptop. I have nothing but good things to say about its hardware. It's got a beautiful 3K 120Hz display, amazing keyboard, extremely large touchpad, lots of ports so no need for a dongle anymore, and there is even an SD card reader built in. So what is my overall opinion on using Linux on a laptop? Well, it's not great, but not too bad as well. If I can get Suspend working on my laptop, it would be an 8 out of 10. Right now it is only a 6. I love the snappiness of the system, but I have also some issues using some software in Linux, especially Davinci Resolve. It lacks a lot of things, but it also allows me to get my work done without getting into my way. It requires a lot of time and efforts, and that's the reason I don't think it is going to be as popular as the other two major operating systems any soon. When I am using Linux on my laptop, sometimes I just feel grateful for all these amazing developers' work. So despite it is far from a perfect operating system, I just can't stop recommending it to other people. I want to share this beautiful thing. More people should be aware that such amazing things exist in the world. And if you are willing to join this community, you are helping everyone as well.